This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I am your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, selling media to small business. Now, one thing that might not be obvious to a lot of people is just how many media markets around the world are comprised predominantly of SME/SMB clients, right? These are essentially clients with less than about 100 employees. Now, the approach that is required to sell to these clients is very, very different to selling to a medium or a large agency client, right? You need to consider the available budget they may have for advertising. You need to consider their capacity to invest at the right level to garner a result. You need to consider their ability to convert the leads that you generate. What is that process that they have on their business? What's their ability to carry and service those clients they convert? The list kind of goes on, right? It's not an easy space. That is why we are going to go right into this one. We're going to get into the weeds. Our guest today is Ramon Rodriguez. He's a general manager at Corp Australia, based out of Geelong, and he has done time in multiple markets with the company. And I really wanted to kind of get into real tactical stuff here, just the very specific elements of how do you sell into that, what we call, I guess, the SMB space, small to medium business in Australia. But I think that the fundamentals of this are universal across the globe, and many markets around the world, even markets you might not think, are actually comprised predominantly of SMEs. I know, somewhere like Dubai, for example, is an SME market. So really interesting when you start actually thinking about companies that are big media companies and that have a massive part of their revenue base coming from selling to these small to medium advertisers. It's its own unique subset of media sales. It is worth understanding and knowing. Even if you don't work in direct sales, even if you don't service these types of customers, I think there's still a lot that we could get from today's episode. So give it a listen and let's jump into it now.
The first five.
Hey, Ramon, welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, mate. Before we sort of jump into the episode today of selling to small to medium business, tell us a bit about yourself. Give us your background in media. Tell us a little bit about your current role at News Corp.
Yes, I've been in media for quite a while now. So I actually started in a little bit of an unconventional place. I started off at the Yellow Pages. So the directories that we all have probably got it as doorstops right now. So started there and worked with them on their print to digital media transition. It was definitely interesting. And over the last 7 years, I found myself at Corp Australia. Currently, find myself in general management, which includes full P&L responsibility, advertising leadership, and working really closely with our editorial teams, which is always interesting.
Awesome. I know you and I crossed paths when you were living and working up in Brisbane. I don't know if we ever met face to face, but I do remember at that time, I believe you were leading a direct sales team. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So you're probably the right guy to talk about this topic of selling to small business, because I started in direct sales too. And I think when we think of this idea of selling to small to medium business, it can be very easy sometimes to just think of it as a fairly one-dimensional kind of process. I think a lot of the time, people who aren't in it think that maybe selling to SMEs is like selling smaller packages, or they're the clients who we only really sell this short-term distress deals to, which we know is not the case. Can you sort of talk a little bit about what the reality of selling to a small business is, and particularly selling to a small business in 2023? Like, what does it entail? What are some of the challenges that you're observing, your team are coming up across in market?
Yeah, well, the small to medium sector is a really interesting one. I think traditionally the stigma in market is short-term offers at a low price, but it couldn't be really any different most of the time. So there's about 2.3 million SMBs in Australia, so quite a lot. And all of them need marketing. The challenges for SMBs are largely similar to bigger business, but the economic climate has a little bit more of a direct impact on their back wallet, and then therefore a flow-on effect to their marketing and media budgets. The challenge when speaking to an SMB is they're largely ROI focused, and if they put $1 in, they want $2 out. So they're extremely focused on that return of investment, which isn't always easy with media, as we all know. So performance outcomes is important for most of the marketing managers or even owners of businesses you speak to. And the marketplace is extremely competitive, because it's not just are they going to buy TV, outdoor, radio. When they start going into the digital space, there are hundreds of digital agencies that we compete against as well. So you've got to be really competitive and really understand the sector to do well in it, I would say.
Yeah, it sounds like it's an evolving space because, you see some media publishers that have really kind of moved away from having a big direct sales team, and you've seen others that have really started to double down and invest in growing their market coverage in that SMB market. So I'm really keen to get into this one today, mate.
Media Sales Mastery.
So let's talk about targeting and prospecting small business. Are there some hallmarks of an SMB that would make them a good advertising client versus maybe a client that is worth steering clear of?
100%. If you don't, you'll find yourself spinning your wheels and burning hours and hours not getting to your targets. So finding the right client, particularly in the SMB space, is one of the hardest things to do, one of the most time-consuming parts, but it'll definitely give you an ROI on your time. Or you'll be spending time on clients that will really never spend. So if I look at breaking down an ideal SME customer into 3 categories, the first one is looking for a business that is in a stage of growth. So if they're looking to grow market share or increase revenues, it's a great time to talk about advertising because they've really got to do something different. So a marketing strategy is really important. If they're changing their business, if they're going from seasonal or they're developing a new revenue stream or they're focused on one product and service and they want to move into a new sector, media conversations are normally welcomed really well. The third category, which is actually my favorite, is you finding SMB businesses that are already investing in media but aren't working on it too effectively. Their strategies aren't too good. So you go in and really workshop what they're doing and lead with education and thought leadership to the client and essentially look at how you can bring whatever they're doing with another agency or another provider in-house and run everything for them. Generally, this is going to be good because they already see the value of advertising in media. All you've really got to do is communicate why doing it with you would be probably add more value for their business. What I would say to stay away from is legacy businesses that have been around for 40 years, they've never advertised, they've just got a website. Convincing them to do advertising and media with you now and they haven't over the last 40 years, don't kid yourself, you're not that good. It's going to take quite a lot to get them off. So maybe, 1 in 50 may come off, but if you just focus on trying to find clients that have actually got a need for advertising and media, you're going to have a much better luck and strike rate.
So it's a really interesting insight there, like clients that obviously have a need or a challenge that needs to be met or are in a growth phase. I'm curious though, it is a real kind of, an SMB is such a catch-all term for like a business with 5 people to a business with, I think it's under 100 is the definition in the Australian market in terms of the size of the business. Across that really kind of diverse customer base, broadly speaking, what level of understanding do most SMBs have around media and advertising? How much time should a rep have to spend on education around their channel, around their formats, around their medium and what it does? And ideally, where should this occur?
Yeah, so good question. So I think it's a really broad spectrum, like you mentioned, Jamie. It really depends on the size.
Yep.
As mentioned, most of them are focusing on instant returns, which obviously isn't generally, can generally be generated instantly. So education is really, really important. A lot of the time, my teams spend a lot of time educating clients on the importance of a full funnel marketing strategy, so awareness, consideration, and conversion. So I would say in our initial uncovery and discovery process, we probably spend about 50% educating the clients on why they need brand awareness, not just performance, and the importance both of them have in driving sustainable marketing and revenue growth. We actually focused on spending time on the marketing theory of short and long, which definitely helps. So education should be consistent as well, because once you have the client, no matter what you told them when you were onboarding them, when the campaign goes live, education is still really important. Because it's not just about getting that one campaign and getting a sugar hit, it's about sustainable growth for us and the business as well that you're working with.
I mean, sugar hit is such a perfect expression too. I remember when I was in direct sales, when I was starting out, you had those looming monthly targets that you were constantly chasing, and there was always this real, I guess, a kind of like a tension between this client could potentially be a really good long-term partner with the ability to invest at a really high level if I take my time to nurture and educate and grow them, or this client could give me that $3,000 to $5,000 that I need right now to get to my number. That was kind of, that term sugar hit was such a good expression for it, of it gives you a solve to your short-term revenue challenges, but it kind of creates a lot more headaches in the long term, and it potentially burns an opportunity before you have the chance to really kind of take the client on the journey.
Yeah, no, it's definitely right. I would definitely agree with that. Often when you go to see an SMB, there's probably a small opportunity that the client may actually think is right for them and they want to buy it, but it's not going to meet their brand outcome. So you'll get it for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever the campaign is, and you'll never get repeat business. But what you're walking away from is a opportunity that could be 10 times the size. So doing right by the SMB and actually standing firm on what you believe in and what's right for them is really, really important.
You were talking about how the space is like there's TV, there's radio, there's out of home, there's print, there's all these different types of publishers who are really selling into that SMB space. But then you've also got, digital agencies, I think you were saying as well, are really playing quite heavily there. Yeah. Are there certain mediums or certain media providers that small business like owners have more receptivity to? Like, are there more people competing for their advertising budgets, if that makes sense?
Yeah, you're spot on, I would say. So definitely 100% hands down, it's performance media. So it's largely your Google and your Facebooks and anything that has got a tangible return.
Yep.
Which is quite interesting and quite tricky at the best of times. What we've generally found, we've done surveys on this and spoken to clients, the average SMB gets between 7 to 10 cold calls a day.
Wow.
Trying to get services sold in largely to Google and Facebook. So considering they're obviously really important outcomes that are part of the funnel, it's something that they need to invest in. So that makes the space for publishers really, really competitive because every man and their dog offers the service. So over the last about 5 years, News Corp has started focusing on performance media and News Corp digital solutions. It's actually one of our fastest growing revenue streams. So anything that has got a tangible return, we find generally SMBs are a little bit more receptive to it. Gone are the days of just saying you're going to get 10,000 or 50,000 impressions. They generally ask a little bit more of a question in terms of, what does success look like and how can I measure it?
It's a great call, mate, because I think, even reflecting on my days, not having that level of tangible ROI or not being able to demonstrate the effectiveness of the channel, it was always really challenging. And it wasn't just challenging in terms of deciding whether the campaign was a success or not. It was difficult to kind of qualify what the client's budget or investment in the medium should be. It was a little bit of there was sort of a dark arts to it. It didn't feel like it had a lot of science behind it. What does the process look like now in terms of qualifying a client's budget? Like, what's that process? How do you ensure that, you can uncover the client's budget amount without offending, right? Or without completely overshooting the mark, but also without undershooting or, getting to a place where maybe they don't invest enough in order for the campaign to be effective?
So getting a budget is something I call a high-risk question. It's not something that you would lead in to a meeting with, but it's something that you definitely don't want to leave a meeting without having.
Yeah.
Not for the fact that, so the media salesperson can be greedy and recommend their harder way, but understanding, A, what's in their budget and what can I generate in terms of value for this customer. So the number one rule is don't leave a meeting without one, but generally, especially when you're speaking to the smaller sector, they actually don't have a marketing or media budget. So generally, you've got to work out what their goal is and then work backwards. Sometimes they are going to know it. So feeling them out is always a good way to go. So, for example, you could ask them, depending on what your budget is depends on what sort of value I can generate. If I came back with a strategy that was around $50,000 or $100,000, which one would you be more comfortable with? And generally, they're going to say, 50 or 100, and you can sort of feel them out and get them to agree on a particular number. But it's not easy. It's definitely a high-risk question, so you've got to earn the right to ask it.
Hey, this is Jamie. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which is all around selling to small business. Now, in the Australian market, certainly, a lot of SMB clients are serviced directly by media salespeople representing their media organizations. Direct sales is a topic we have covered off at length in previous podcast episodes. And one of the ones that I would really encourage you to go back and have a listen to after this episode is the 10 Commandments of Direct Sales, featuring the ever insightful Tony Prentice from Mamma Mia. Here is a snippet of that episode now.
Effectively, you're going to have to ride more bumps in this job. And your ability to figure out what your coping mechanisms are that lead to your resilience will be one of the secrets to success and longevity in the role.
So that was Tony Prentice of Mamma Mia, and the episode title was The 10 Commandments of Direct Sales. It's in the back catalogue. Go back and have a listen, rate, subscribe, follow, share on LinkedIn, all the jazz that podcast people tell you to do. But most importantly, take the learnings and the insights, apply them to your role next week, and get better at your job. Now, back to the episode. The phrasing that I've used a little bit, which I find often works, is kind of being able to say, look, is there a budget figure that's unlikely to offend? Is there an amount of money there, or is there a proposal amount that we were to come back with that would be unlikely to offend? And I know that sounds like a weird way of phrasing it, but it sort of just kind of really calls out what we're trying to do here, which is like, we don't want to come to a place where we pitch something to you that's just completely not feasible. It works probably a little bit more in the agency space when somebody's an advocate for the budget. When it's a business owner and it's their own investment level, I know it can be a little bit harder, but I think you make a great point. Like, don't leave a meeting without it. Otherwise, you really don't have anything to then action off the back of that when you come back into your business.
Yeah, I think probably the one most important thing in getting a budget from SMB is if you ask a business owner and they don't know about media and you ask them what their budget is, what they're thinking straight away is, this guy just wants to know how much money I've got. But it couldn't be further from the truth. You've got to educate them on why you're asking and how important it is to generating a campaign that's going to be successful for them. So the education, once again, comes up, even in simple things like a marketing budget.
What about like that whole idea you're saying around success metrics and spending a lot of time talking about the role of brand versus short-term performance or tactical stuff? Success metrics are massive in small business. Is it fair to say that you probably feel a high level of pressure or scrutiny on the results that your team drive for a small business advertiser? And if so, why would that be?
Yeah, no, 100%. Because largely, if you're speaking to a smaller business or a medium-sized business and it's the business owner, if the campaign doesn't generate what they're after, it can actually impact their personal lives. I've seen it happen before. It's not great. So performance metrics and expectations are really important. Generally, you'll hear SMBs say, we'll be happy with a campaign that generates us brand awareness. A great question to ask them off the back of that is, great, how are you going to measure brand awareness? Because I guarantee you, 5 out of 10 times when someone says brand awareness, they're looking for some sort of outcome off the back of the campaign. So if you set the right expectations, scrutiny is something that's a lot easier to deal with. But at the end of the day, the main things they look at is, brand awareness is one, reach is definitely one, but it's largely what we're seeing at News Corp is revenue, online sales, phone calls, so a little bit more of a tangible result.
I think, that point you said around it can impact someone's personal life is such a good point. Like, not saying that these SMEs are on the brink of collapse or they're destitute or anything like that, but there's a different level of pressure on cost and investment in a small to medium business. And I think it leads really well into the next question around failed campaigns, right? So the ones that maybe don't perform to the customer's expectations. This one has always been for me a real challenge of selling into that direct space is fronting up to a client when, particularly if it's a first-time advertiser and the campaign has really failed to deliver on their expectations. Can you talk a bit through the approach of managing a client who is underwhelmed by the campaign's performance, and how do you sort of work through that dialogue and potentially get the relationship back on track?
Yeah, well, I think it really goes back, Jamie, to the original conversation when the proposal is put forward to the client or the strategy is presented. It still goes back to expectations. What is the worst case what this campaign can deliver and what is the best case? And if you set realistic expectations on what the worst case actually could be, there shouldn't be too many situations of an underwhelming campaign. But at the end of the day, marketing is a science based on theory, so it isn't going to, generate the outcomes you forecast 99% of the time. But if you can spend a lot of time educating the client on what the worst case could actually be before a campaign goes live, you're going to find those situations are a little bit trickier to navigate. And I think it's important, if you rock up and a campaign hasn't performed, what are we going to do about it from here? What's the next strategy you're going to learn based on this failed one? So it's definitely not something easy to handle, but I think if we work on expectations at the start, it's something that's going to be a little bit easier to navigate moving forward.
Yeah, it's a great call, mate. I think the one thing I would add to that, which is probably something that I think you've kind of touched on there too, is that initial nurturing phase once the campaign goes live. Like, I think there is a tendency to get the booking and think that that's actually the end of the hard work and the win, like sort of celebrating the win. But really the work actually starts once that campaign has been booked into the system, and now you're in that initial sort of, let's say, that 30-day, almost like the buyer's remorse window, where the advertiser is potentially looking at it and needing to have someone there who can actually really kind of hold their hand through that initial launch phase and keep them really focused on sort of holding their nerve through that initial kind of period where the campaign has to bed in. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that a process that you sort of implement, or is it sort of more of an intuitive thing?
No, it is. It's something we actually focus further on than the first 30 days. For us, it's really the first 3 months. What we generally realize is if customers opt out of campaigns, it's generally within the first 3 months, and it's largely the bill shock. They get their first bill, and a campaign may be for 6 months, and we're hoping to get outcomes at the end of the 5th month, and it's month 2 and they've got a bill, and they're thinking, I haven't seen all the ROI from it. So within the first 3 months, it's really important to have a service rhythm and regular touch points over and above what you would normally have after that 3-month period. We've got something like a bit of a monthly review call, and depending on the investment and the size of the strategy, we'll have a bit of a weekly touch base. But during that period, the account manager or the media sales representative or the BDM is spending a lot more time with that client than they would be post 3 months.
The other thing that sort of comes to mind, mate, is you've got only a certain amount of capacity and only a certain amount of time in a given week as a media sales professional. And I often find what's really interesting in particularly that sort of SMB space is you might only be selling an average sale of, let's say, $5 to $15 to $20 to $30,000, but the effort required to actually service that client, to implement that campaign, to book that revenue, it's still the same as booking like a $300,000-$400,000 campaign. Like, you still have to build the proposal, you still have to talk to pricing, you still have to generate a contract, you still have to get, the credit approvals and whatnot. How I suppose do media sales professionals really manage this kind of workload? Like, any advice for, I guess, making sure that you optimize your time and your capacity so that you can actually carry and service SME clients whilst maximizing your revenue? Like, how do you avoid spreading yourself a little too thin?
Yeah, the best direct reps I've seen, they know what their time is worth to them. What I mean by that is if you've got a budget of $500,000, what does that make your run rate for the week? What's each hour worth to you? And then you've really got to work out, these proposals I'm doing and these opportunities I'm doing, are they too small that it's going to burn me out and not add enough value? Are you working smarter, not harder? At News Corp and my team, we really focus on not too small. We focus on a little bit of the bigger end of town when we're talking to direct clients. We focus on bigger clients, better campaigns, and fewer of them. So we're not in the volume game, but it's about finding the right client, putting the right proposal in front of them, generating a great strategy that generates an ongoing commercial relationship. But the reality is, depending on your organization and your role, you need to find out where your sweet spot is in terms of size of client, strategy, spend levels, and work on that. And work back on your time. Work out what your run rate is. It's something that's really important in direct sales. And don't try to do everything, because you'll end up doing everything mediocre.
I think that's such a good call, mate. I love that idea of, I think it's an exercise we don't do enough of really just auditing where we're spending our time. I think if you were to go back and do a historical kind of assessment on your calendar of over the last 4 weeks, what percentage of my week was spent in revenue generation mode versus what was spent on low return activities, it would actually kind of scare people just how little time we spend as sales professionals or as sales leaders generating revenue. I think that's something that's always worth keeping a check on. And I think, the approach of really being able to put a specific value against an hour of your time in a given week is a really good way it's a really enlightening way of actually looking at how you need to run your business to be successful.
Yeah. And when you do the hour exercise, Jamie, 9 out of 10 times you're going to be confronted with what that number is. So it makes you double think, am I doing what my time is actually worth? Or am I spinning my wheels? Have I got my time spent in the right area?
Mate, I couldn't agree more. Well, look, let's jump into the listener question.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
So this one came from LinkedIn. I think they've asked to keep their name confidential, but that's okay. Here it is.
Hey Jamie, I absolutely love the podcast. I've been in the radio industry for 8 years, and for the last 3 years, that has been in sales, and I've learnt so much in the past 2 weeks listening to an episode each day before work. My question is about discounting rate. I've noticed a shift maybe in the last 6 to 8 months that clients are becoming more selective of where advertising dollars go, which is understandable. Before, I've never really had businesses question me on price or say, can you do better? But lately I've been getting a few. The station's policy has always been no discounts and no bonuses because we are the number one station in town. But in my head, and from what I've read in articles, wouldn't it be better to give the client a small discount so they feel like they've had a win and I've also had a win getting the business? How would I approach this with my sales manager?
A lot to unpack there, Ramon. What do you reckon?
Yeah, discounts are really an interesting topic, and there's definitely two sides of the argument. So firstly, I'm not a fan of dropping rates because I really see that it does reduce value. If you look at some of the best brands in the world, they often don't discount heavily because they really value their product or service. So I would rather do the right thing and be confident that our service will generate value for the client. But obviously, in this economy and, the looming recession people say we are in, particularly in the direct space, I think discounts do have its place. But the thing you need to be careful of, the question of is it a 5% or is it a 10%? How big of a discount you need to apply can get a little bit risky and dangerous. So you've got to be careful. Once you give someone a 10% discount, they're not going to come around for the next campaign and ask for a 15% discount. And it's not a race for the bottom. I would encourage you to think about how else you can add value except price. And, they shouldn't really be buying on price, but value. And I think you should just really have a candid conversation with your sales leader because he's essentially there to help you solve these problems. So I think having the honest conversation with him is going to do you a world of good.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight, mate, because part of me, it's not necessarily about lowering the price. It's about the perceived win that the client's getting. Do you think are you getting that from the question too, that we're not pricing ourselves out of the market here, but being firm and not offering any discount when the clients are asking for one is creating a bit of friction, and it's potentially something that they're just conditioned or attuned to want to do as part of the transaction. That to me feels like maybe what she's saying here. What do you think?
Yeah, potentially. I think you've just got to be careful because when you start discounting your services, it reduces the value. So some of our products and services, we will discount where relevant, and some of them we won't. So it just really depends on the medium you're selling and if it's commercially viable. Over a discount, is there something else you can do that's going to add value to the client? Could it be, a week free or, a bonus run of impressions or campaign when they reach a certain time or duration of the campaign? What else can you do to add value? But I think, as I said before, discounts definitely do have its place. You've just got to be careful with them. That's all.
I agree, mate. I guess where my head would go with this one too would be, discounting. If it's really important to the client that they want a discount or a bonus, like you can actually use that as leverage with your sales manager. So if, for example, somebody asks for 20% off or they ask for 50% bonus or something like that, rather than it just being that one-dimensional, let me go back and see what we can do, maybe it's a case of being able to say, look, in order to make those kind of concessions, what I would potentially need is a commitment from you that you could book this today. Or in order to make those kind of concessions, I would potentially need to see if we could actually extend your time in market and maybe make this campaign go for a bit longer. Or maybe we get first right of response on the next deal. All these kind of little things that could actually help with the deal velocity or could help you close the business out quicker or could give you a bit of a win that you can go back and sell the discount to the business. Sometimes like that kind of thing represents a really easy win. If this is important to the client, then there might be a way, and I hate using this expression, but if that's the discount or price or bonus you want, there's kind of a way that we might need you to behave in order to do that. Would you be open to paying cash up front? Would you be open to putting a deposit in? Would you be open to a longer cancellation period? So that when I go back to the business, I can actually have a bit of a case as to why this still makes commercial sense to do this. Just a thought there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And probably further to that, I would think, using discounts for leverage can definitely help as well. So, we have sliding scale discounts. So basically, the more the investment is or the bigger the strategy is, the larger the discount. So you can use that as well to make a little bit more of a lucrative deal for the business, and obviously for the customer as well, to get more value out of a similar investment.
Yeah, it's a great call. Well, mate, we're at the end of the episode. It was really, really enlightening to have a chat to you, mate. And before you go, I'm just curious a little bit more about the world of news, the world of News Geelong, how you're finding the market, how you're looking at 2023. Just keen for any parting thoughts from you around the outlook for the next 12 months.
For the last 12 months, we've seen the market is quite short in terms of campaign duration and what people and clients and agencies are wanting to commit to. It seems like it's opening up to us. So over the last week, got quite a big campaign of over $2 million off one of our new business development team members. So, which is pretty exciting. So, seeing that sort of revenue is coming through back into the market, haven't seen it in direct space for over 12 months. So feeling optimistic about what the next financial year could bring all of us.
Awesome, mate. Well, thanks for spending some time with us today, Ramon. Great to catch up. I'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes so people can connect with you. And, mate, congrats and well done on what seems to be a very successful start to 2023.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me on.